Welcome to Saga Thing, where we're putting the sagas of the Icelanders on trial. I'm John.
And I'm Andy. In each episode, we choose a saga, offer a close reading of the text, and then judge the actions of the characters at the Saga Thing. Or at least that's the theory, you know. In practice, we seem to be spending a lot more time on one saga, Grettir's saga.
Well, yeah, we sort of knew this was going to happen. There are a handful of sagas that we expect to spend a while dealing with. And we knew going in that this was going to be a monster.
And it is. And that's before you had to go off gallivanting around the far reaches of Canada and then come home and get your gallbladder yanked out right before recording the conclusion that we're trying to do.
I prefer to think of it as a partial disemboweling. It's so much cooler that way.
But everything's okay now, right?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for all the well-wishers out there. I'm doing fine. It was a little bit of an emergency, but I was in the hands of a skilled team of knife-wielding madmen, and they took very good care of me.
That's good.
So I have a new motto. My new motto is slightly less guts, slightly greater glory.
That's a terrible motto. I mean, the slightly is what ruins it for me. So could you maybe do something like less guts, greater glory?
Too late. I've already made the t-shirts.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Now, you've also been busy in this hiatus, haven't you?
Yeah, you know, I tinkered around. Had a bit of my own guts ripped out here and there.
In other words, you completed your tenure portfolio and submitted it.
Yeah, that's what I did. Yeah. Well, and you know, it was fun actually reflecting on the last 5 years and what the podcast is and all that kind of stuff in the narratives. But, I'm very happy not to be stressing over that document anymore. It's just too much pressure.
Well, good luck to you. You'll be fine.
I hope so. Thanks a lot. It's going to be another 9 months of waiting to find out how it went. So,
I'm telling you it went fine.
Yeah. Anyway, enough of this idle banter. Let's get started.
Yes, please. So this is our third episode on Grettir's saga. So if you're new to Saga Thing, well, first of all, thanks for listening. Second of all, stop listening immediately and go find episodes 1 and 2 of Grettir and start with those, because we're kind of starting in medias res here.
Or stop listening because no one in their right mind wants to listen to a podcast that uses terms like in medias res, and I guess except for people like us. We're exactly that kind of weird.
Oh, let me have my fun. Okay, so we're picking things up in the middle of the action. Is that better?
That's a little bit better. It'd be even better if we explained which action. There's just so much going on in this saga. Where did we stop?
Okay, so we left Grettir comparing arms with his brother Thorstein Drummond while awaiting favorable seas for a return to Iceland.
Now, to be fair, he was kind of kicked out of Norway for burning the sons of Thorir of Gard and then failing to complete an ordeal by fire to clear his name. So, things really began to sour for Grettir after that Glam episode, or Glom.
Well, and that's fair, yeah. So we're picking up with the 47th chapter of the saga, when Grettir returns home to discover that his father is dead, his brother Atli was murdered by Thorbjorn Oxen-might, and that he himself has been outlawed for the death of Thorir of Gard's sons.
It's grim news all around, and things are about to get messy.
They were kind of already messy.
Yeah, that's a good point. Things are about to get much messier.
All right. Hit the imaginary button and let's get started.
After a short trip to Norway, in which Grettir managed to get himself outlawed from the country, he returns home to Iceland only to find that he's been outlawed for the same crime. With nowhere to go, Grettir is forced to wander the countryside, lurking in caves and stealing his daily bread. Will Iceland forgive him his trespasses, or will they hunt him down like a dog and make him pay for these crimes? As tension builds between true justice and the law, Grettir is caught helplessly in the middle. Along the way, you'll run into a few familiar faces, like Snorri Gothi, Gudmund the Powerful, Bjorn, the champion of the Hítardal people, and his nemesis Thord Kolbeinsson. Grettir the Outlaw's amazing adventures span 19 years. With so much time to kill, Grettir racks up quite the body count. But it's not all fun and games for our hero. Tainted by Glaum's curse, Grettir spends many lonely nights lying awake in fear of the spirits that haunt him. This fear drives him to seek companions who often have nefarious intentions. With no one to trust, Grettir flees to the island of Drangi with his brother Illugi. There, the two of them will try to live out their days, if boredom, cold, and a bit of black magic don't get the better of them first. This episode has its fair share of bloody battles, hair-raising chases and troll fights. But it's not all wrestling and gore. You'll laugh when Grettir delivers the first wedgie in Western literature, cringe when his manhood is revealed, and cry when Thorbjorn Hook and his men finally close in on our weakened hero. All this and more in the thrilling conclusion to Grettir Saga, chapters 47 to 84.
We're going to get through all that in one episode.
Well, we'll certainly give it the old college try.
In my experience, that means ignoring everything the professor says and then waiting to the last minute to panic. The results are usually pretty lackluster.
I think that's a little bit too real, and actually not terribly far off.
Let's try to preserve the illusion of competence.
Okay, I think we will. Let's not forget also, John, that we have a saga brief coming on Grettir's relationship to Beowulf coming up as well.
I don't think we're really going to have time.
And we've got a judgment episode on Grettir coming as well.
Is that it? Are you done? I really hope everyone who listens to this is enjoying Grettir as much as we do, because it just seems to go on forever.
Well, given that we're close to 3 hours in with Grettir, I think we can safely assume we've scared off all the faint-hearted Grettir haters.
True enough. So, as we said, we anticipate tackling one of these monster-sized sagas a year, usually during the summer. And after this, personally, I'm looking forward to a couple of bite-sized texts.
Yes,
maybe
definitely.
A palate-cleansing Thorir or something.
All right, well, let's get the show on the road, shall we?
All right. Grettir's Revenge. In Weatherfjord, Odin's weapons stormed the bear-hugging giant's adversary. The ox mustered its full force. Now for Atli's slaying, long unavenged after he slumped to the fair earth, he is repaid in kind. So, Grettir finds himself on the shore at Borgarfjord as a full outlaw, which means there's a price on his head and a severe penalty for anyone who helps him. He wants to get to his mother's house, but he also knows that his sentence of outlawry means he has to travel incognito. So he puts on a hooded cloak, steals a horse named Saddlehead from a nearby farm, and rides off.
Now, the problem with this plan is that the horse's owner is a lively farmer named Svein. Mm-hmm. And he's not eager to lose his favorite horse right now, or any time actually. So he jumps on another horse and chases after Grettir.
Right.
It would be great to get a real good chase on horseback going here. You can never get enough horse chases. Imagine this.
I'm more partial to car chases myself.
Well, you don't get too many of those in the sagas.
No. Anyway, this is one of those times when we get to see Grettir's trickster nature. He stops people as he passes them, and he teaches them riddles in verse about himself, explicitly so that they can pass those riddles on to Sven, who's riding along in his wake but can't catch up because Grettir's got the better horse.
Apparently much better. I mean, if he's stopping to teach riddles to people, how...
Well, people are quick studies.
I guess they are. Anyway, Svein's a poet himself, so he's able to work out the verses pretty quickly. And by the time he catches up with Grettir at the farm of Grim Thorolfsson, he's pretty sure he knows who's taken his horse, and he's not looking forward to confronting Grettir, which is smart. But he comes on anyway, and when he sees his horse Saddlehead, which is an excellent name for a horse.
It is.
Any of you with young horses looking for names, Saddlehead is right there for you. Anyway, Saddlehead is grazing next to Grim's house, and he shouts out just half of a poem. Who's been riding my mare? What will I earn for the favor? Who has seen a greater thief? What has the cowl-wearer staked? Now
that's a challenge. Not so much because of the questions as because of the half verse.
Right.
And Grettir, of course, can't resist, and so he finishes the poem. I rode the mare to Grim's. He's more a man than a crofter. I have little favor to pay you, but let us settle in friendship.
Oh, so nice.
Yeah. Now Sven is pleased by Grettir's response, and the two men spend the evening exchanging humorous verses about their day's riding, which they later call the Saddlehead verses.
Oh, the laughs they had.
Well, right. Sven considers himself well paid for the use of his horse by these poems, and he returns home in the morning with both horses.
Now, this isn't that element of Grettir's personality that critics find so difficult. He sort of randomly has these playful moods, and he can be completely charming in those moments. Mm-hmm. And I also love the idea here that good poems are a kind of currency for these men.
Yeah, we see that kind of transaction elsewhere in the sagas, although poems aren't always considered reasonable forms of payment.
Right. But for now, all's well, and he's successfully escaped the gaze of any of Thorir of Gard's spies, so he's able to reach his mother's house without attracting attention.
Well, apart from the attention he's already attracted by stealing Sven's horse.
And talking to all those people.
Right.
Not to mention all the people that met him at the shore and said, "Hey, did you know you're an outlaw?" Anyway,
welcome! Get away!
It seemed to work out okay, and Sven's willing to keep Grettir's secret for now.
Right, which means Grettir can visit his mom in peace.
Mm-hmm.
But this reunion with Mama Astis shows another side of Grettir. It's actually a pretty heartbreaking moment. Grettir sneaks into the house and wakes her up, and she kisses his cheek. It's like a coffee commercial.
Yeah.
There's a real tenderness to their relationship, and to a certain extent, she becomes that emotional anchor that we saw with Aud Vestin's daughter in Gisli.
Kind of. I mean, you just love adding your own subtext to these stories, don't you?
I love revealing subtext.
I guess it's just not as developed as I would like. I mean, Grettir's not planning on just spending time catching up with his mom here. No one knows that he's home except for all those people he talked to. And he immediately takes advantage of that by riding out to the farm. He immediately takes advantage of that by riding out to the farm of Thorbjorn Oxen-might, who is his brother's killer. Mm-hmm. He catches Thorbjorn and his teenage son Arnor out in their fields, and in a short and very disappointing fight, he kills them both. I mean, it's really kind of anticlimactic end to what should be a more prolonged and tension-filled feud, I think. The saga author is really missing a great opportunity here.
What's wrong with a killing being short and sweet for a change?
Because Grettir has to have someone to fight with.
Oh. Anyway.
Grettir's
very careful to obey the rules of revenge killing. Right? Even though it means blowing his cover, he rides to a nearby farm and announces the killings and his responsibility. Mm-hmm. So he can't be accused of murder or secret killing, but he also can't stay with his mother now that everyone knows he's back.
Right, and his brother-in-law, Gamli, advises him to make a quick escape. So Grettir rides off to Laxdal, and there he stays with Thorstein Kuggason for a while.
Right, now there's an interesting digression in the saga here. Grettir loses a spear during the battle, and the saga writer says that it wasn't found until near the end of Sturla Thordarson's life.
Oh, that's right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, for people who don't know the later period, Sturla Thordarson's actually pretty important, and he's the nephew of Snorri Sturluson.
The infamous Snorri Sturluson.
Of course. Now, Sturla's a pretty interesting guy in his own right. He was a saga writer who focused on the Samtímasagar, the contemporary sagas written in the 13th century. He was also a law speaker for a while after Iceland's capitulation to Norway in 1262, and then he died in 1284, so the saga author's telling us that Grettir's spear was found more than 250 years after this fight.
Right. Now, a skeptical man might point out how unlikely it is that that was the same spear that was found.
That's true if you're being too literal, but I think it's worth pointing out that Sturla Thordarson is thought to have composed a biography of Grettir the Outlaw around 1280. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a significant connection between this saga and Sturla Thordarson. His biography is like an artifact of sorts, kind of like the spearhead, preserving Grettir's legend. And that was a direct influence on the author of Grettir's saga, so that's pretty fascinating to me.
But we won't concern ourselves with that, because right now Grettir's looking for a hideout, and as it happens, he seeks refuge with one of Sturla Thordarson's most famous ancestors, the illustrious Snorri Gothi.
Oh, good for you. You got a Thingman mentioned.
Little hand for Snorri.
Yeah, but let's be clear, Snorri isn't the kind of guy to put his neck out for someone else, and he doesn't want much to do with Grettir, so he refuses to take him in. Although he does offer to speak on Grettir's behalf at the Althing, which is nice.
Well, that's something. I mean, Snorri's a pretty powerful guy by this time, so his help is no small matter. Mm-hmm. But Grettir has to move on. He spends a winter with his friend Thorgils Arason, and he behaves himself pretty well while he's there. He nearly kills one of Thorgils' other house guests, but he restrains himself.
Good for him.
And Thorgils actually gains prestige for managing to keep Grettir from killing anyone for an entire winter.
That is quite a feat.
It says a lot about Grettir at this point.
Do you get the sense, when you're reading this, that the author sometimes doesn't know why these shorter episodes are in the saga? I mean, we're skipping quite a few of these kinds of moments, but... Yeah,
but Grettir's got to pass the time somehow, right? I mean, this saga is going to cover almost 20 years of outlawry.
I guess so, but I think the writing's pretty weak in this section. There's far more potential in building the tension between Grettir and a fixed rival over time, kind of like they did with Gisli and Eyjolf. But not here.
I mean, true, but Grettir will get his own Eyjolf soon enough.
Not really, but I guess I see what you mean. He does have a rival eventually, but it's not terribly impressive. But getting back to the story. In the spring, a lawsuit is brought at the Althing against Grettir's family for the death of Thorbjorn Oxen-might, but Grettir's friends decide to try and help them. So Thorgil's going to meet with Skafti the law speaker, who in turn is going to invalidate the case against Grettir's family, because Grettir, as an outlaw, is no longer his family's responsibility. Well, in fact, Thorbjorn's family ends up having to pay Grettir's mother for Atli's death instead. It's quite a reversal. Yes,
and Snorri Gothi, who's always working an angle, teams up with Skafti to make a proposal. Grettir's family will forego the compensation payment for Atli if their enemies will agree to void the outlawry judgment against Grettir.
And that's a pretty good deal for Grettir's family, really, since they came to the Althing not expecting to win compensation for Atli anyway.
Right, no, that's a good point. And Snorri thinks it would be a good deal for everyone, since, as he says, I expect Grettir to inflict a lot of suffering for as long as he's an outlaw.
Yeah, but Thorir from Gard, whose sons were killed in that fire, he's going to flatly refuse to avoid the outlawry against Grettir. So there's no deal struck here. And just to add insult to injury, Thorir then teams up with Thorbjorn Oxen-might's brother Thorod Halfpalm to offer a massive reward. They increase the bounty on Grettir. So anyone who kills him is going to be quite wealthy.
That didn't work out so well then?
No, it did not. You know, I expected better from Snorri, but honestly, we can't blame him here. Thorir is not going to forgive Grettir anytime soon for the death of his sons. And so as time passes, we're going to see the truth of Snorri's prediction that many men will pay the price for Grettir's ongoing outlawry.
So now Grettir's back to living rough. He's stealing in order to survive. And he eventually gets careless and spends several nights sleeping in the same sheep pen. And that gives the local farmers a chance to gather together and jump on him while he's sleeping. And although it takes 10 men to hold him, he does get himself tied up, and he's held until the local lord returns from the Althing.
Now, that local lord is Vermund the Slender. Everybody remember Vermund? It's mentioned that he is the brother of a certain killer Stur, who I believe is one of my thingmen.
Good for you. You got one too.
Yeah, that hardly counts. Just a mention. Now, fortunately for Grettir, Vermund's wife, Thorbjorg the Stout. Does everybody remember Thorbjorg the Stout? Quite a lady. She arrives first and takes charge of the situation, which is kind of what she does.
Right. Thorbjorg's kind of awesome. She squats next to Grettir and asks why he's causing trouble with her thingman. Of course she would. And Grettir, being Grettir, says, well, you can't provide for everything. I had to be somewhere.
Now, I think it's really telling, and I'm glad you mentioned this, that she calls all these people her thingmen. Now, we know from Eyrbyggja Saga that Vermund isn't the most imposing guy around, but this seems to have more to do with Thorbjorg's firmness of character than a slight to Vermund's authority. She's just recognized as having an equal share in the authority of the Gothorth.
Right. Now, Iceland's laws forbade women from holding chieftaincies, but every Gothorth was more or less left to its own devices when it came to how the power was shared out and managed. In Hrafnkel Saga and Vatnsdala, we saw brothers who shared the Gothorth amongst themselves, and here we see a kind of husband and wife team of chieftains.
Sure, Vermund is the official title holder, but it's clear that Thorbjorg's word is just as much law as his, because on her authority, the farmers untie Grettir. And I also think it's interesting that the saga author has clearly read Eyrbyggja Saga, and is just playing on Vermund's weakness here.
Yes, absolutely. And in this moment, we get a rare glimpse into a whole different world of relationships and power structures when Vermund returns home and demands to know why Thorbjorg freed Grettir. Now, one of the reasons she gives for letting him go is that Grettir's kinswoman Hrefna would not expect me to allow him to be killed.
Yeah.
So suddenly, and for just a second, we can see a web of relationships and communications among the women of Iceland.
I like it.
Right? It's clear that this structure parallels that of men in terms of interconnected social obligations, and it's also clear that women expected other women to be able and willing to assert their power on one another's behalf.
Now, this is the sort of thing you have to be looking for to find in the sagas, and John's quite good at that. But for now, Grettir's allowed to leave, and he's running out of places to go. So he returns to Thorstein Kugason for a while, but Thorstein expects hard work out of his household, and I think we know already that that's really not Grettir's cup of mead. So, so the next summer he heads off again, looking for a place where he can lay about.
Yeah, now there's going to be a lot of this in this episode. Grettir's an outlaw for 19 plus years, and a lot of that time he spends wandering around Iceland seemingly at random. It's actually not totally at random. He's moving around so as to avoid taxing any one region's patience for too long. But the result is a lot of kind of disorienting movement. Mm-hmm. And we'll be skipping some of the episodes along the way, but I really recommend reading this whole thing to get the full effect of just how long Grettir spends on the run. It's pretty epic.
It is, and I also think that he moves around because the author wants to hit all these different parts of Iceland so that he can tap into the different stories and legends from those regions. This also, though, all this moving around is, I start to run into some trouble with the saga. I mean, each episode is kind of exciting, and some of them are actually very funny, but a lot of them come and go without the story moving forward significantly. I mean, there's a certain amount of redundancy in what we're being told over and over here.
Oh, I don't know if that's fair.
It's fair.
This saga is a character portrait. What we're getting over the course of its length is a sense of the complexity of Grettir himself and of the world that he has so much trouble negotiating.
Well, don't misunderstand me. There's good stuff here. I'm not denying that, but I'm not the only one to complain about the lack of direction in this saga. And this part, more than any, lacks focus. That's a good complaint.
Yeah, no, it is. Fair enough. Well,
yeah.
But while we've been talking, Grettir has wandered back and forth, and now he's living rough in Kjol, which is a low population region in the interior of the island. He's surviving at this point by robbing travelers who take the paths across the open ground there.
Right, and we should be clear that Grettir's not always the nicest or most noble robber on the road. I mean, he's no Robin of Locksley. He pretty much takes what he wants when he wants it, often with very little regard for the victim. But it's not always an easy venture. There is one point, and it's a fun episode, where he attempts to rob the horse from a traveler named Hallmund of Baljökull. But Hallmund, who uses the pseudonym of Loft, just tears the reins back out of Grettir's strong hands and rides away.
Right. Now, and Grettir's pretty impressed by that, because he thinks of himself as being a fairly strong guy.
Yeah.
But he does manage to rob plenty of other travelers, enough of them that Skafti Lawspeaker finally has to kind of take him aside and ask him to leave the area.
Yeah, it's a tough position to be in. I mean, remember, Skafti doesn't think that the outlawry of Grettir was handled honorably, but as lawspeaker, he also can't flout the law no matter how misapplied it is, and Grettir's really becoming a problem in the region.
Yeah, but that means Grettir's got to find yet another place to live.
Right.
Grettir, the outlaw. I did not ride to face the tenders of swords that strike terror into shields. I tread a solitary path. A life of tribulation is shaped for me.
So, Grettir's back on the run.
Yeah, and now he moves into a fairly wild area in the north. He's still struggling with that fear of the dark that he suffered in his fight with Glom. So that means he hates being alone. But his status as an outlaw stands between him and any real friendships.
Real friendships, you said?
Yeah. Grettir's increasingly going to be targeted by other outlaws who come to him as false friends.
Right, yeah.
Usually because they're hoping to win their freedom by killing the dangerous outlaw.
Now, we did talk about this on previous episodes, that one way for an outlaw to redeem himself to society is to collect bounties on other outlaws. That's actually a pretty smart law in that it discourages outlaws from ganging up on people. Right. It's also going to make Grettir's existence a little bit more difficult. He has to weigh up anyone who wants to spend time with him against the likelihood that his new friend may be out for the bounty on his head. But on the other hand, he really hates being alone. It's quite a conundrum.
Right. And so 2 outlaws in a row, Grim and Thorir Redbeard, are going to make attempts on Grettir's life in the next year. Grim is kind of a simple lad, and Grettir spots him right away.
Yeah, so Grim doesn't last long, does he?
No, he does not. Grettir kills him more or less straight off. Thorir Redbeard is actually much more clever. He's actually been hired by Thorir of Gard to kill Grettir. He spends 2 entire years living with Grettir and acting as Grettir's servant.
Oh, that seems like a really long time. But Grettir loves having someone to do the work for him. He hates doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the saga writer says, Grettir had never led such a comfortable life.
Basically has a slave.
Right. But he's still very careful not to turn his back on Redbeard.
Well, that's just good thinking. I mean, anyone who's that eager to make another outlaw's life, especially Grettir's, that cozy, that person's definitely up to something.
No, that's true. And Grettir's cynical enough about human nature that he's not likely to be caught unawares. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, he's still got this problem of being afraid of the dark. So he likes having the company around so that he's not alone at night.
Yeah, Glom's curse is really starting to take its toll. He's finding himself cuddling with a guy named Thorir Redbeard.
Yep. But Redbeard eventually gets bored of waiting for his chance. So when a storm comes in one night, he stages an accident by smashing the boat that they share and casting their fishing nets out into the water. And since Redbeard's apparently already established that he can't swim, Grettir's got to drop his weapons and dive in to grab the nets.
It's a little suspicious, but not really a bad plan. And
No.
it almost works. When Grettir wades up out of the water, Redbeard grabs Grettir's sword and leaps at him, and Grettir's only just barely able to avoid the blow by diving backward into the water.
Yeah, the only flaw in Redbeard's plan is that Grettir is a good swimmer. And he's pretty good at holding his breath, too.
Right, so while Redbeard's watching the water, Grettir's able to swim around the sandbank and then sneak up on Redbeard from behind. Redbeard's pretty dumb. He grabs Redbeard, throws him to the ground, then snatches back the sword and chops Redbeard's head off. And after this, Grettir's learned his lesson. He's going to refuse to take in any more outlaws, even though he's still afraid of being alone.
It's a nice little bit of fighting, but the fact that Grettir's nearly killed with his own sword is also an interesting bit of foreshadowing.
Yeah.
We'll see something later on that calls back to this. Thorir of Gard is now furious. He's obviously waited 2 years for a report back from Redbeard.
Right.
And he rides to the moors with a band of 80 men to try and just eradicate Grettir. They managed to surround him.
80 men, that seems like overkill here.
Well, actually, it's not enough kill. Grettir chooses a narrow pass to defend, and he's able to fight off the men attacking him from the front. But no one gets around and attacks him from behind. And that's actually a little odd, because Thorir did send a bunch of men around to attack from behind. But after a while, he realizes that the ambushers are all getting killed and wounded without ever reaching Grettir, and he panics at the thought that Grettir might be protected by some kind of black magic.
You know, and the funny part about this scene is that Grettir and Thorir are both confused about what's happening.
Right.
And so when the surviving attackers run off in fright, Grettir goes to see what's been happening, and that's where he finds a large man who's badly wounded, guarding his rear, and there's a huge pile of corpses all around him.
Right.
It's a cool scene.
Now, the huge man is Hallmund. It's the guy from the moors who proved he was stronger than Grettir by snatching the reins of his horse back during that attempted robbery.
Yep.
And Hallmund is turning out to be the best friend Grettir's ever had.
Yeah.
The two of them have killed 18 men. 12 for Hallmund, 6 for Grettir. And wounded a bunch of the others. So that Thorir of Gard is humiliated when word gets out of his failure. He took 80 men to kill one and failed.
Yeah. Grettir and Hallmund both survive their injuries, of course, and Grettir composes a poem in celebration of Hallmund's friendship.
The battle-keen sword crawled like a snake over tracks of wounds when the stormy weather rained weapons in Hrutafjord. Those staunch men from Kelda had the chance to hold my wake, but brave Hallmund from the cave helped me escape unscathed.
That's so nice.
See, he can be polite. He can be friendly.
Yeah.
Grettir spends the entire summer with Hallmund and Hallmund's daughter in their cave dwelling, but he eventually decides to visit his relatives in Breithafjord. But no one is strong enough to protect him from his growing enemies, and so Grettir has to move on again to Murar.
Now, the author's missing an opportunity here. I mean, Hallmund has a nice daughter. How about, like, a little bit of love for Grettir? You know? But no.
He's reporting history.
None of that. Yeah, sure he is. No love for our poor outlaw. Instead, the author's going to rush headlong into another one of those episodes where he tries linking Grettir to the action of other sagas. That's really the primary objective here.
But I know you're pleased with this one, because it's the story of Grettir meeting up with Bjorn Arngerson, better known as
Bjorn, champion of the Hittadal people.
Yes. So, Thingman name drop for you.
Ding. Well, this link actually makes sense. We learned in Bjorn, and it's
This
one of the
one
better.
does.
This one does, and it's one of the better written ones. We learned in Bjorn's saga that Bjorn has a weakness for harboring outlaws, in part because he's kind of treated like an outlaw himself. And Grettir is the uber outlaw of all Iceland. So it's only a matter of time before these two met.
Well, I mean, their relationship isn't as chummy as all that. Right? Bjorn offers to let Grettir stay in a cave on a nearby mountain, as long as Grettir only victimizes people who aren't under Bjorn's protection.
Yeah, so what's wrong with that? Bjorn's looking out for his own.
Well, it feels a little bit like a mobster's protection racket.
No, it doesn't.
Nice farm you got there. It'd be a shame if Grettir happened to it. Maybe you'd like to be protected from him.
You're making it sound bad. I don't think that's
I
how it
know
goes.
a guy who knows a guy. I could make sure Grettir doesn't stop by your place.
All right. Are you done? Now,
Yeah,
if you
I'm
actually,
done.
if you paid attention when we did Bjorn's saga, you'd know that Bjorn's feuding with Thord Kolbinson. So there's a lot of farms nearby under Thord's protection, and these are the ones that Grettir is allowed to rob. It all fits rather nicely with the narrative of Bjorn's saga, actually, if you pay attention.
Okay. So my favorite part of this section is that the author of Grettir's saga has to one-up the Bjorn saga author.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about the games, right?
Yeah.
So the saga author tells us, Grettir stayed with Bjorn, and they challenged each other at various feats. The saga of Bjorn tells us that they were a match for each other, but most people believe that Grettir was the strongest man to have lived in Iceland in his generation.
Right. Now, I want to be clear. That's a quote.
Yes.
Grettir's saga says the saga of Bjorn tells us they were a match for each other, but most people believe that Grettir was better. That borders on authorial invention. Grettir's extra super strong, right? Even more than other books say.
Well, there is a certain fan fiction vibe to that line. In fact, there's a lot of fan fiction vibes throughout Grettir's saga.
It's true.
But meanwhile, a man named Gisli Thorsteinsson, not to be confused with the outlaw Gisli Sorsson, has been running around boasting to Bjorn's enemy, Thord Kolbinson, that he, Gisli, would make short work of Grettir if only he had the chance.
Now, Thord is perfectly willing to egg Gisli on.
Of
What does
course
he have
he
to
is.
lose? And when Grettir steals 4 sheep and roughs up some local farmers, Gisli rides out to confront him.
Well, although you make it sound so immediate, he waits a couple months before doing anything.
Well, I mean, do you think he's hoping that Grettir has moved on by then? Or is he
so.
really such a fool that he's planning to attack Grettir?
Well, I think he's a fool anyway, but the fact that he only brings 2 men with him suggests that he's quite confident in his abilities. The 3 of them ride along the path by Grettir's lair, shields shining in the sun, bright cloaks over their shoulders. It's quite an impressive sight.
Right. This is really one of those great Grettir moments. Grettir's watching these guys, and we're told he felt he really would need to take some of their belongings off of them, and he was curious to meet such braggarts. Then he runs down the slope, grabs the bag of clothing that Gisli's carrying behind him, and says,
I'll have this. I often stoop to trifles.
Now, Gisli is going to put up a brave front here, but that's all it is. He calls out his friends to attack, but then he stays behind them. He's really a kind of a coward.
His friends aren't, though.
No. So, of course, Grettir kills them both in a short fight, and then he beats the tar out of Gisli until he flees.
I'll never understand how these cowardly guys manage to surround themselves with brave warriors. You think of Eyjolf the Grey in Gisli's saga, or
Thord Kolbinson in Bjorn's saga, or even I think
right.
Bjorn the Bearstalker from our last episode of Grettir's saga. They're all braggarts with very little physical prowess to back up their words.
Right, exactly. So it also points to one of the basic parameters for socially approved masculinity in the sagas, right? We're never really asked to feel affinity for a cowardly man that I can think of. Right? Cowardly behavior is a tip-off that you're probably looking at the villain of the story.
True, but it's not as if all villains are cowardly.
No, not at all. But the Venn diagram of saga villains and saga cowards has some significant overlap. That's all I'm saying.
Fair enough.
And anyway, Grettir's not done with Gisli yet.
No. Grettir's going to follow him, and Gisli keeps throwing off weapons and armor and, for some reason, his clothes to delay Grettir, who is happy strolling along behind him, picking up anything Gisli drops. I think there's a good opportunity for some humor in the Grettir Saga movie here.
Well, there's a folktale about this.
Is that right?
A girl who has to throw off her clothing piece by piece to delay a wolf that's chasing her.
Anyway, this is going to continue until Gisli's exhausted and stripped straight down to his underwear.
Now, finally, Grettir sort of spares us all by rushing at Gisli before he loses his underwear, and says,
Are you Gisli who wanted to meet Grettir Asmunderson? I must give you something to remember me by.
Then he grabs a branch, pulls Gisli's underclothes up over his head, and beats him with the stick until he flays the skin from his ribs and back.
That's great. Is this the first mention of a wedgie in all of Western literature?
It may well be.
It couldn't happen to a nicer guy. I mean, I've said before, I'm a little ambivalent about Grettir as a person, but Gisli really deserves this beating, and this is so nicely done.
Well, Gisli eventually manages to crawl away, and he makes sure never to cross Grettir's path again. Mm-hmm. Grettir, meanwhile, keeps all the clothes and weapons that Gisli threw off, and of course, he composes a verse about Gisli.
Of course he does.
The horse that nibbles with his teeth lightly when it ought to bite, saves its breath until the end, then runs off from the other horse. From me that day on Murar, interfering Gisli ran farting like a cart horse, stripped of fame and honor.
And pants, obviously.
Obviously.
Oh, that's a great poem.
So Grettir spends a couple of years eking out a living in Bjorn's lands, mostly by stealing from nearby farmers. But eventually Thord decides to mount another attack on Grettir, and this time he sends his son, Arnor the Earl's Poet, with over 20 men to attack Grettir. There's another pitched battle, this time with Grettir defending himself on a spit of land by a river, and he manages to kill 8 men and badly hurt 2 more before Arnor calls off the attack.
Now, we're skipping some details here, but this fight is going to get back to your point, I think, from the last episode.
Does it? You're going to have to refresh my memory. It's been a while.
Yeah, well, you were talking... It's been a while, yeah. No, you were talking last time about how Grettir seems to be flying by the seat of his pants most of the time, and I disagreed with you. But this is another one of those scenes where I guess you could say the author works to convey a sense of Grettir's desperation.
Oh, right, yeah. No, he says something like, Grettir knew the options were to run away or attack and hold back nothing.
Now, I still tend to read it as evidence of Grettir's ability to plan in a crisis and to act. He's chosen a great defensive position, and he's weighing his choices at this point in the battle.
Honestly, you'd think he'd at least consider diving into the river that's right behind him.
That's not really in keeping with Grettir's style. And besides, his plan works. But the deaths of 8 men lead to a general uproar in the neighborhood, you know? So,
understandably.
Grettir's got to hit the road again.
Right. And by now, it's getting harder for Grettir to find places to stay. He's kind of made the rounds. He visits all of his allies and relatives in turn again, but no one wants the responsibility of shielding him. He's stealing sheep to survive, and at one point he kills a young lamb, and is then kept up for days by its mother bleeding outside his door. It's getting pretty desperate. Other than that sheep, he's living all alone.
Yeah. Now, he does find a kind of secret valley, which he calls Thorsdal, after a giant named Thorir that he claims lives there. The valley has fat lambs, a river teeming with fish, and brushwood in abundance for lighting fires. It's a good place.
Yeah, it's a rare bit of good luck for Grettir, and he makes the most of it, passing a very comfortable winter in Thorsdal.
But meanwhile, another outlaw named Grim moves into Grettir's old caves. And this outlaw is going to be harassed by Grettir's friend Halmund, who doesn't want anyone else to take Grettir's spot. Now, unfortunately, Grim ends up sticking an axe in Halmund, so Grettir's strongest friend is now dead, and it's getting lonelier and lonelier for Grettir in Iceland.
But of course, Grettir doesn't actually know yet about Halmund's death.
No, true enough.
And once again, Grettir's enemies are closing in behind him. Thorir of Gard and a large party of men ride by Grettir's new home, and Grettir only escapes detection by throwing on a disguise and giving Thorir the old, "He went that-a-way" gag. Thorir and his men end up flailing around in a marshy bog, and Grettir's able to run away while they try to extricate themselves.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's true he gives them the slip, but it's also becoming clear that even Grettir can't keep this up. He tells a friend that he'd rather avoid the men hunting for him and not have to fight them. "When Thorir musters so many men, I make for safety."
Yeah, no, Grettir's a realist. He mentioned earlier that he prefers not to fight more than 4 men at once, which seems quite reasonable. I think he comes across as a fairly cagey and intelligent guy, not the kill-em-all type that he's so often portrayed as.
Yeah, I mean, we focused on some of the criticisms of Grettir's character in our first part, but it's true that he's often credited with being a more complex figure than a first reading might suggest. Gunnar Karlsson, for example, calls Grettir an honorable man whom fortune deceives, while Stefan Einarsson calls him a valiant fighter and a savior type who cannot save himself, which is quite accurate, I think. So there are a few people who read him as a more sinned against than sinning.
Well, I'm glad to have the support.
It's a bit of a blend.
But let's dig back into the saga, because Grettir's about to face another of his many monster foes. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who are keeping track of the parallels to certain Anglo-Saxon epic poems, this one is just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Grettir versus the trolls.
I entered the black chasm where the plummeting rock face gaped with its cold spraying mouth at the maker of sword showers. The plunging current pressed hard at my breast in the troll woman's hall. The wife of the god of poets burdened my shoulders with her hate.
John, do you notice how sexual that whole thing is?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that argument's been made about other poems than this one.
Of course, yeah. But that's pretty overtly
it really is
sexual right there.
Yeah.
I'm not going to reread it, but there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so once again, we're going to have to cover the action and save parallels for the saga brief that we're working on.
Right. Now, I don't even think we need to point out the parallels this time.
I know. I mean, anyone who's read Beowulf or seen a Beowulf movie, I'm sorry, or anyone who's even heard of Beowulf, they're going to be able to spot this one pretty clearly.
So the basics are that a farmer named Thorstein the White and his farmhand are killed on a farm in Sandhagar. Thorstein's wife Steinvor and the children still live at the farm, but reports are that the place is troll-haunted, so no one wants to visit or to work at the farm.
Mm-hmm.
Grettir comes by on Christmas Eve and helps Steinvor and her daughter to cross the river so they can go to Mass. Then he heads back to the farm because he wants to see the troll for himself.
Now, it's interesting that in this saga, these hauntings so often coincide with Christmas, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. We'll be hosting a panel at Kalamazoo next May called New Voices in Saga Studies, and we've got a paper on the panel that's going to be on exactly that subject.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm looking forward to that one. Now, I hope to see some of you fans of Saga Thing in the audience there.
Me too. Now, I'm not sure what will be said in that paper, but I think there's a definite religious theme at work here. Right? Mm-hmm. Among other things, Thorstein and the farmhand are both killed at Christmas time, and they both stay home when everyone else goes off to church. So they're probably pagan, or at least, shirkers.
Yeah, that's probably not a coincidence. There's a strong subtext in this whole saga about the unrest of the pagan dead in the newly Christianized North. We saw similar things in Eyrbyggja's saga and in Eric the Red's saga, I think. But anyway, Grettir's saga is just a little bit more blatant about the connection than some of the others. But as we've said, the author of Grettir's saga has clearly read all the other sagas, and he's incorporating and expanding on a lot of their themes.
Right. Now, and Grettir himself kind of sits in an uneasy middle ground between these two religions. Right. He's an enemy to the pagan undead, but notice that he also doesn't go to church with Steinvor.
Well, there are monsters to slay, and since they like to come out when people are getting all religious, it makes sense.
No, it's true. But I like the detail that when Steinvor tells the priest about this troll-like man who helped her cross the river, the priest says, "Oh, he might be there to bring about a remedy to your troubles. We shall keep quiet about this."
So, I like the voice. So he's warning her not to jinx it, right?
Yeah, kind of, sort of. I think this priest knows who Grettir is, and he's encouraging her to keep this presence a secret. I think he's functioning like the good clergy in other outlaw stories, right, who operate as a kind of intermediary between the outlaw and the community. Mm-hmm. There are actually some interesting connections here to the story of Hereward the Wake, who's another outlaw from English.
That's very, very interesting, John. It actually is, but now's not the time for digressions. We need to get to this troll attack.
Everyone should read about Hereward the Wake. And what about Friar Tuck? I mean, these are great stories.
Trolls, John. Real, live, angry trolls.
All right, be my guest.
Okay, so Grettir settles down in the farmhouse, and he's going to wait patiently through the night. Very familiar story here. At midnight, he hears a tremendous crashing noise, and a troll woman rushes into the room, armed with a trough and a big knife. Now she and Grettir rush at each other and begin throwing one another about and smashing up the place, and everyone thought the place would fall down. Mm-hmm. She's too strong for Grettir, though, but he's also too quick for her, so neither of them can win.
Again, the parallels are going to be pretty blatant here.
Yes, they are. And eventually the troll woman tries to escape and drags Grettir all the way down to a chasm right by a waterfall in the river. And that's where he stops her and they begin wrestling yet again. Finally, Grettir manages to get his right arm free. He draws his sword and chops off the troll woman's right arm.
Now, obviously she throws herself into the water at that point and escapes into a cave under the waterfall. But as a left-handed gentleman, I'm interested in the detail of which arms are getting free and or chopped off here.
That's what you're focused on, not the one-armed monster fleeing to an underwater cave?
Well, we decided we're not dealing with the parallels right now, so yeah, it's a strong second place for me. Okay. It's a good example of the sort of descriptive detail we get from the better saga writers, but I'm not sure I understand the logistics here. Grettir's right arm is free, but they're in a face-to-face wrestling clinch otherwise, right?
Sure, it says she was pressing him so tightly to her body that he could do nothing with his arms except clutch at her waist. And then I guess he gets his arm free.
Well, then how is he cutting off her right arm? I mean, their bodies are both in the way, right?
Well, maybe he just pushes off from her at the last second. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, it's been bugging me for a while, so I thought I'd bother you with it.
Well, bother someone else.
I should probably ask our friend Josh about it. He's kind of the authority on medieval wrestling descriptions.
That's actually true. You do that. Now, meanwhile, in the saga, Grettir spends several days recuperating from the fight, and then he consults with that priest that you liked from before, the Friar Tuck fellow. Mm-hmm. The priest is skeptical about Grettir's story of the fight, so he accompanies Grettir to the edge of the waterfall, and then agrees to keep an eye on one end of the rope lifeline while Grettir explores the cave. I feel like we've been here before.
Yes.
It seems like the saga author couldn't decide which version of the story he liked best, so he just included them all. But anyway, Grettir is going to be lurking around the cave now.
Well, he doesn't get to explore very far because the cave is occupied, and not by a one-armed troll woman.
No, there's a giant down here instead. Mm-hmm. Grettir later calls this the troll woman's ugly lover. Now, the giant immediately attacks Grettir with a pike, but Grettir chops it in half. The giant then tries to grab a sword that's hanging on the cave wall. A sword on the cave wall? But Grettir's next swing disembowels the giant.
Now, this is one of the nastier bits of battle description in this saga. The giant's innards go gushing and slithering over the rocks and into the water. It's a little disturbing for me to read, frankly, given my recent experiences. Now, while Grettir carries on hacking the giant to death, the intestines and organs float out of the cave and back up to the surface of the water. When the priest sees these guts floating by the cave, he thinks Grettir's been killed and runs away.
Yeah, this is the second time now that this has happened to him. Mm-hmm. Grettir's got to find better rope holders.
It's true. Or else just not bother, since he doesn't seem to have any trouble getting out of these situations without their help.
Well, meanwhile, inside the cave, Grettir finds the bones of two men, and then he packs them into a bag.
Well, that's not all. The author also strongly hints that Grettir loots a treasure trove while he's down there. We don't know all the details, but we're told people assume that it was a great hoard.
Does he pick up a sword with a nice a hilt of a sword with a nice carving on it?
No.
Of course, that's only going to make it harder for Grettir to climb up the rope, which he has to do again all by himself since the priest has run off. But he does eventually haul himself up the rope and goes and leaves the bag of bones outside the church before heading back to Steinvor's farm to get some much-needed rest.
Right, now that's a revealing piece of information, I think. The bones are almost certainly those of Thorstein the White and his farmhand, and Grettir's brought them back, presumably so that they can receive a Christian burial. Right, he leaves a rune stick with them explaining where they came from, along with a couple of verses describing the battle. We don't get a lot of information about Grettir's religious beliefs, so this is an important moment. He may not be a churchgoer himself, but he does assume that the churchyard is the proper resting place for the dead.
Right, and so to wrap up this section, Grettir spends a winter in Steinvor's farm, but Thorir's coalition soon learns where he is, and he has to start running again. Now, he's going to visit Gudmund the Powerful, who advises him to try living on the island of Drangi, which is an inhospitable place that can only be accessed by a ladder. It's a pretty cool place, actually.
Yeah, it's a great idea. But now Grettir has become so afraid of the dark by this point that he can't bear the idea of being alone on an island, so he has to sneak back to his mother's farm to seek her advice.
Oh, he's going to his mama to cry, is he?
Oh, jeez. Well, outlaws need a strong female influence. Right? Again, think of Gisli's wife, Aud. Grettir is not married and doesn't have any female sibling or have any connection with his female siblings or acquaintances. His mother's really the primary woman in his life.
Now, of course, that's maybe not entirely true. Maybe later in the summer, Steinvor, the woman who Grettir has spent the winter with, she gives birth to a boy that she names Skeggi. Now, at first, everyone thinks that Skeggi is the son of Kjartan, who's the son of the priest, but later this kid grows up to be huge and strong, and everyone realizes he's probably Grettir's son.
And so the saga of Skeggi Grettisson begins.
Well, no. Skeggi's gonna die at 16, and we're told there's no stories about him.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, can't help you.
So back to Grettir. This visit to his mom isn't all pleasure. Grettir learns about the death of his friends Hallmund and Thorstein Kuggason, and realizes that he's running out of allies and options. Meanwhile, in addition to Thorir of Gard's forces, there are other random outlaw hunters still wandering around. One day, Thorod Snorrison rides into the valley, looking for an outlaw to kill. Any outlaw will do.
Oh, this is so random. Do we have time for this?
Oh, we'll do it quickly, and it's important because this is going to result in Grettir making a much-needed new ally.
That's true. All right.
So, Thorod's a bit of a sad sack, and his dad, Snorri Gothi, my Thingman, has thrown him out of the house for being useless. And the price for getting to come home again is that Thorod has to kill an outlaw. He tries to go after a local shepherd who's a minor outlaw, but the woman of the house gives him a tongue lashing and shames him into going away.
This guy. I mean, obviously, he's going to go after Grettir, but why would you do this? Thorod is so hopeless. I mean, this is just a lot of work to go through to commit suicide.
Well, the woman shames him into trying it. And he approaches Grettir aggressively enough, but Grettir's pretty clearly not impressed. And when Thorod finally works himself up to attacking, Grettir just parries his wildly swinging sword with a shield and doesn't even bother to draw a weapon.
Grettir just seems a little bemused by the whole thing. The text says, this went on for a while, and Grettir did not sustain any wounds. And then Grettir said, let's put a stop to this game. You'll never take me on and win. And Thorod again struck as hard as he could. I just love the image here. Grettir's just exasperated with this kid, but he almost doesn't want to discourage the lad. It's kind of let him have his go.
Well, not at first, but eventually he gets bored, so he grabs Thorod and sits him down on the ground hard.
Oh, what an image.
He gives Thorod a little talking to about biting off more than he can chew.
It's like picking up a toddler.
Oh, it's great. He cuffs him on the head and he sends him home to his daddy. He also, and I want to point this out, says that he's not killing Thorod because he's afraid of angering Snorri Gothi.
Well, Snorri's got his back, and Snorri's also a dangerous man to cross. So, but at the same time, Snorri's very sneaky. You don't want a sneaky man for you.
Maybe he's sneaky, but he does know how to reward good behavior. When he hears about Thorod's little adventure, he smiles about it and pledges to be a better friend to Grettir if he can.
Yeah.
And Snorri is a powerful friend to have, and Grettir is going to need all the friends he can get.
Excellent.
Grettir and the Island of Drangi.
The seamstress sitting at home. Short-sworded, she calls me. Maybe the boastful handmaiden of ball trunks is telling the truth. But a young man like me can expect sprouts to grow in the groin forest. Get ready for action, splay-legged goddess.
So, like, if the last one was kind of somewhat sexual, that one...
Oh yeah, no, he's done away with the subtext. It's all text now.
And there's good reason, which we'll get to. So, as we said, Grettir's been told to try setting up a household on the inaccessible island of Drangi. Now, the problem is that he's afraid to be on Drangi by himself. Fortunately, he doesn't have to because his much younger brother Illugi decides to come with him to the island. Now, their mother's not happy about it and prophesies doom, but Grettir reassures her and the brothers head off.
I don't know how reassuring he actually is. He says something like,
"Do not weep, mother. If we get killed, we'll make sure that people say of you that you had sons and not daughters."
Well, you know, that's sort of reassuring. I mean, at least he's promising to die well.
Well, you have to doubt that their mother finds that particularly comforting.
Poor Grettir. That's sad to me. Just, if he's promising they're going to die well, and then what happens? It's just
I know.
Sad. Well, they're going to get more company for the island because they pick up a vagrant on the way who agrees to be a kind of manservant for them. His name's Thorbjorn, but everyone calls him Glaum, which means something like clown or merrymaker.
Right. Now, Glaum, and this should not be confused with Glom, the undead monster. Glaum is a trickster type, and apparently Grettir thinks he's hilarious. We don't really get a sense of why. We're just told that Grettir thinks he's highly amusing. Maybe Grettir just has a really simple sense of humor.
I have a feeling he does. I mean, it's hard to imagine Grettir finding anything at all funny, but I bet a guy who stumbles and falls a lot would tickle his fancy.
Yeah, Grettir's a pratfall guy.
Yeah.
So the three of them bribe a farmer to ferry them out to the island of Drangi, which turns out to be a great spot for them.
Yeah, Drangi is a high-topped island with steep cliffsides plunging into the sea. Now, there's a system of ladders in place to make landing on the island a lot easier, but if those ladders are pulled up, it's essentially impossible to get onto the island, especially if a few men are throwing rocks or axes at your head while you try.
I don't know if you've ever looked at pictures of Drangi, but it's pretty remarkable looking.
It is.
We should put up a couple of pictures on the website or something so people can get a look at this thing.
Will do.
Drangi was formed by a volcanic eruption about 750,000 years ago.
You don't say.
But it's essentially flat across the top. And the author isn't exaggerating. The sides of the island are practically straight up and down.
Yeah, so it's a great spot defensively, but it's got to be pretty exposed up there. It doesn't look too hospitable.
Yeah. And it's off the northern coast of Iceland, so I imagine it's got to be brass monkey cold in the winter as well.
Brass monkey? Well, it's best that the island's easily defended, though, because most of the locals aren't all that happy that Grettir's moving into the neighborhood, and there's good reason why.
Yeah, well, I mean, the saga introduces a massive local cast of characters at this point. But we're just going to deal with them as they come up in the story. We won't hit you with them all at once. The most important local is a chieftain's brother named Thorbjorn Ongl, or Hook.
Oh yeah, this guy. He's a real piece of work. I don't like him.
Yes, he is. Thorbjorn Hook is a big, strong man who's missing an eye. He actually lost an... Yeah, I won't get into that. Thorbjorn Hook is a big, strong man.
People might want to know why he lost his eye. What happened to it?
His stepmother actually threw a game piece at him because he was being a snot, and she accidentally gouged out one of his eyes.
Nice.
At which point he beat her to death.
Oh, nice.
Right, so he's widely regarded as a troublemaker, and he's infamous for this incident where he killed his own stepmother.
You know, that is pretty bad. And it's taken us a while to get there, but we have finally found our adversary for Grettir. Not saying he's worthy, but he's an adversary.
I mean, he's definitely meant to be intimidating, but Thorbjorn's almost like a villain out of a bad B movie.
Yeah.
But for right now, the important point is that Thorbjorn and his brother Hjalti are two of about 20 stakeholders who share ownership of Drangi and use it as a sheepfold. So Grettir moving onto the island is going to make him a lot of powerful enemies very quickly.
That's right. And they also go there to collect eggs. I think there's a lot of birds laying eggs and nests in those cliffs. So it's a good source of food. Now, of course, there isn't much they can do about it for now because Grettir's got the high ground and he's pulling up those ladders.
True. Right. And he's going to take advantage of that by claiming all the sheep on the island as his. So when some farmers come to collect their sheep in the fall, Grettir pulls up the ladder and shouts down that he intends to keep everything on the island for himself.
Now, is this the possession is 9/10 of the law argument?
Yeah, and there's a little bit of a nya in there as well. As you're fond of pointing out, Grettir's not really a nice guy most of the time.
No.
And we're getting a taste here of why people don't generally seem to like him much.
Well, I mean, there's not much anyone can do about it right away, and Grettir settles in very comfortably on the island. It's just a shame that he treats everyone this way. Now, they manage through the winter, but in the spring, Grettir decides to collect some supplies while everyone's busy at the local assembly. So he leaves Illugi and Glaum on the island, sneaks onto land, and steals what he needs.
So far, so good.
That's right. And if he just went back to the island right now, there would be no problem. But Grettir's bored, and it's understandable why he would be. And so he's feeling the need for a little social interaction. So he dresses himself in some shoddy clothes and walks into the assembly in disguise.
So this would be the assembly full of men whose sheep and island he's more or less stolen.
No, not more or less. He's actually stolen them, yeah.
This should end
He's going to go hang out with them.
This is the point in the saga where I've got adrenaline junkie scrawled in the margin of my book. It just seems like Grettir can't stand things being quiet for long. He's the kind of guy who's going to throw rocks at the hornet's nest because he's bored.
Well, I mean, at first everything is fine and no one notices him. But Thorbjorn Hook's pushing people into participating in wrestling contests, but no one wants to wrestle a giant pair of brothers, both named Thord. So Hook sees this big stranger sitting in the crowd and tries to force him into the ring. Now Grettir, who gives his name as guest, agrees to wrestle, but only if he's guaranteed safe conduct by everyone present, which is pretty sad.
Oh, yeah. And there's a bizarre moment here. There's a man named Hoff who constructs an elaborate oath binding everyone present to guests' safe conduct. This oath is ridiculously overblown. I think we're meant to think of it as ridiculously overblown, and it goes on for quite a while. Here, I'll just read a single sentence of it. This is one sentence. Any man shall be a truce breaker who breaks this truce or violates this pledge, banished and cast out from God and good men, from heaven and from all holy men, unfit for the company of men, and in all places driven out like an outlaw wherever truce breakers drift, or Christian men attend church, or heathen men sacrifice in their temples, where flame burns, earth grows, an infant calls to its mother, and a mother bears a son, where man kindles fire, a ship sails, shields glint, the sun shines, snow settles, a lap skis, a fir tree grows, the eagle flies for the whole spring day with a firm wind beneath both wings, the firmament arches, the world is settled, and the wind carries water to the sea, or slaves sow grain.
A lap skis. It's a pretty thorough oath, isn't it?
Yeah, there's not a lot of wiggle room there. I recognize that the oath is insane, but it creates an interesting snapshot of people trying to negotiate the problem of oath-making in the years after the conversion to Christianity. Hoff's balancing the two cultures carefully here. Right? The oath is valid wherever Christian men attend church or heathen men sacrifice in their temples.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of tension about the validity of laws and oaths in a religiously divided Iceland, which we can track by paying attention to little clues like this.
Sure, and I think we now know the origin of the holy hand grenade in Monty Python. It's very, very much...
5 is right out!
Anyway,
oh my God.
Of course, as soon as everyone finishes approving of what a fine oath that is, and all agree to it, Grettir then reveals himself. And now suddenly everyone can't believe what a fool Half is to have made such an airtight oath, and they all begin debating whether they'll actually keep to their promise, which I think they should.
Well, I mean, they really don't like Grettir, but this is a tough spot.
Yeah, I mean, Grettir then mocks them while they debate until...
Of course he does.
Yeah.
Of course he does. Like I said, throwing rocks at the hornet's nest.
Yeah, but after a while, Thorbjorn Hook's brother, the chieftain Hjalti, speaks up and announces his intention to hold to the oath. And after that, everyone else falls into line, although they're all very annoyed at Half still for not only making such a binding oath, but taking so long to do it.
Right, exactly.
And Hook's not too happy about this at all.
No, he seems to take it as a personal insult that Grettir has infiltrated the gathering.
Mm-hmm. But while Hook's stewing, Grettir takes on the Thord brothers in the wrestling match. He beats them one at a time and then wrestles them both at once in a long match that ends in a draw. And everyone's very entertained by this match, and Grettir then goes back to the island safely. But as you said, Hook's really angry now, and he starts putting the word out that he's willing to kill Grettir if the other stakeholders of the island will pay him to do it.
Yeah, but instead, most of the owners just sell him their shares on the island for a cheap price. Hook is left owning most of the island for a bargain price, but he hasn't figured out a way to get Grettir off it yet.
But he has a cunning plan.
Now, is this a cunning plan in the Blackadder sense of a damn stupid idea, or is it the good kind?
Oh, no, it's completely stupid. That's why I said it like that. He rows out to the island.
Right, and so you were doing a Blackadder impression.
I was. He rows out to the island and shouts up to Grettir, "Hey, Grettir, could you do me a favor and leave my island?"
That's it.
That's the entire plan.
He's truly a wily adversary.
Well, Grettir then laughs at him, which isn't surprising at all. And when he learns that Hook now owns most of the land, well, he's more determined to stay than ever.
Right. Now, Grettir's response is summed up by the line,
"It's true, I found it tough having the whole of Skagafjord against me, but now that I know this, I'll stop at nothing, because neither of us is smothered in popularity."
I'm not sure what Hook thought would happen, but he's forced to return to the mainland in defeat.
And that's pretty much where things are left for a good long while. Grettir, Illugi, and Glaum spend 2 years on the island and eat most of the flock of sheep that had been kept there, while Hook sits on the mainland racking his brains for another cunning plan. But then one day, Glaum lets the fire go out.
Right, and that's important for a number of reasons. I mean, as we mentioned, it probably gets pretty cold up on that flat top of the island, but there's also the problem of Grettir's fear of the dark, which is only getting worse as he gets older. He doesn't say this to others, but he's near panic at the very thought of being stuck on this island with no light in the evenings.
Well, not to mention that they've got to cook their mutton meals somehow.
True, and since they don't have a boat on the island, Grettir's gonna have to swim across to the mainland to get hot coals to restart the fire.
Now, we've seen this once before. You might remember that last time Grettir had to swim for some hot coals, he ended up accidentally burning down a house full of men and killing the sons of Thorir of Gard.
Well, this isn't going to go quite so badly. Grettir makes the 4-mile swim, but he's exhausted when he reached land. So he finds a farm with a warm room and falls asleep with his clothes for a blanket. In the morning, the farmer's daughter and her servant enter the room, and they find Grettir passed out, but the clothes have slipped off him.
Yeah, it's always awkward finding a naked outlaw in your living room.
It's very awkward. And it's going to get more awkward because the servant woman can't resist commenting on Grettir's exposed manhood. And let's just say she's not impressed. Upon my word, Grettir Asmunderson is there, lying naked. He looks big enough, all right, but I'm astonished to see how poorly endowed he is between the legs. It's not in proportion to the rest of him.
Well, the water's very cold in the north.
Yeah.
But
it's a chilly day.
Now the farmer's daughter is understandably scandalized by her friend. Why can't you ever keep your mouth shut? You're no ordinary idiot. You keep quiet.
I can't keep quiet about that, sister. I'd never have believed it if anyone had told me.
Ouch.
Well, it just gets worse. The servant keeps sneaking over for peeks at Grettir and then starts roaring with laughter. And it turns out that Grettir's actually awake this whole time and he's hearing everything that she's saying. So he's presumably just lying there listening to them talk about his penis, cringing with shame.
Well, he would be if Grettir ever felt anything like shame. But instead, he grabs the servant woman when she returns to him and speaks 2 verses. The one that started this section, and then this one.
The wench takes things too lightly. Few invokers of spear storms have much choice about the sword that adorns their hair forest. I bet my bollocks are twice the size that other spear thrusters boast, even if their shafts can outstretch mine.
It occurs to me we probably should have stuck a warning on the beginning of this episode.
Yeah, I mean, this is about as sexually explicit as the sagas get, and what happens next is pretty ambiguous. Although I think the poem suggests something of it. We're told that the servant woman shouts out, but then she and Grettir are together for a time, and when she left Grettir, she did not taunt him again.
Right. So the question is whether we're meant to read this as a sexual assault or as a consensual casual encounter.
It's hard to resolve it with what the saga gives us, but that implies that she doesn't have much choice about what's about to happen. Anyway, certainly no one else on the farm seems disturbed by what happens, and the farmer gives Grettir a lift back to the island afterward, so...
Well, sure, but that just extends the question as to whether the people of this farm would resent mistreatment of a low-ranking woman of the household.
Well, and whether they'd be willing to get in Grettir's face about it, even if they did.
Right. Unsurprisingly, there's been a bit of discussion about this, and a lot of scholars seem to read this either as ambiguous or as a consensual act. For example, Jenny Jawkins suggests that the statement that the servant woman did not taunt Grettir again is a wink to the reader that she's satisfied with Grettir's sexual prowess. But there are those who read this as rape, and it's hard to say definitively that they're wrong.
Well, an interesting comparison might be the Reeves tale, where, one could suggest that there's some sexual assault going on there, but all the women at the end of that story are quite happy with what's happened to them. Anyway, it creates a certain unsettling balance in this saga. Remember, Grettir started his career by stopping a group of berserks who were planning on raping the women of Thorfinn Carson's farm.
True, but ultimately we're not given enough information to decide this issue, I think. So scholars on both sides are really working from inference.
So let's get back to the story if we can. Grettir makes his way safely back to the island, but his brother Illugi is now convinced that Grettir's pushing his luck too far, having seen him leave too many times now.
Right. And meanwhile, Thorbjorn Hook is finally ready to start moving against Grettir. It's time to talk about the death
of Grettir Asmunderson. I managed to guard my life against the holders of spears. It was not seldom that I needed such faith when hemmed in. Now that tough hag, Land of Stones, has wrought a spell on the tree that sheds flaming battle swords. Fierce is the force of magic.
Well, I thought we'd never get here.
I thought we'd get here a lot faster than we have, actually. I forgot
that was 6 months ago.
This saga is. That's a good point.
So Hook is going to start working against Grettir in earnest now.
Yeah, and in true saga fashion, he's going to start hostilities by sending a total incompetent to assassinate Grettir.
Well, it's sort of like firing a warning shot across the bows.
Well, okay, true. The incompetent in question this time is named Haring. He's an expert climber, so Thorbjorn Hook encourages him to try scaling Drangi and attacking Grettir with the element of surprise. Haring's also a Norwegian, which in this context means he's got the life expectancy of a toilet paper umbrella.
Well, the plan starts well. Haring is able to scale the cliffs of Drangi, and he manages to sneak up on Grettir and Illugi, who are distracted by Hook's boat. Mm-hmm. But Illugi happens to spot him at the last minute and says to Grettir, "There's a man coming toward us wielding an axe, and he looks rather hostile."
Isn't that kind of redundant?
Maybe, but, hostile and threatening aren't the same thing.
Mm.
When Illugi runs at him, Haring panics and leaps off the cliffs, dashing himself to bits on the rocks below. So it's really not gone well.
That might actually be a record for incompetence.
I don't know. Remember Narfi's attempt to scare Cormac with the sausage?
That's a very good point.
Although, to be fair there, Narfi didn't jump off cliffs in fear, so.
Right.
So Hook's plan obviously fails here, and another winter passes with Grettir and company in control of the island.
And this is a significant winter. We haven't been counting them, but it turns out that this begins the 20th year of Grettir's outlawry.
Oh, we should have baked a cake.
Well, no, it's important. Right? Mainly because Skafti the Law Speaker has promised to try to get Grettir's outlawry overturned when Grettir reaches 20 years under outlawry.
Why? I mean, it almost seems as if there's an unspoken upper limit to even major outlawry here. I mean, Grettir's just the first and only outlaw ever to survive long enough for it to become a possibility.
Well, it's true that the author of Gisli's saga wrote that Gisli was the longest surviving outlaw in Iceland's history, with the exception of Grettir Asmunderson.
Right, and that's an interesting point because Gisli's saga is written at least a century before Grettir's saga.
Right, yeah, no, Grettir's clearly a legendary figure in oral stories long before he's written into a saga.
Well, yeah, that may be, but there's some bad news for Grettir, and for you too.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Skafti the Law Speaker, your Thingman, dies in the winter, and Snorri Gothi, your other Thingman, also dies in the spring.
Two of my finest Thingmen. They died too young, damn it.
I think they did all right. And with them, Grettir's hope of escaping outlawry dies too, since they're pretty much representing the power base that could push back against Grettir's enemies.
Now, Grettir's friends still try to get his outlawry voided, and the new law speaker, Stein Thorgesson, is sympathetic to their arguments. Stein, by the way, is the son-in-law of Thord Bellower. So my Thingmen aren't out of this saga yet.
This author's really determined to get every single big name he can think of into the saga.
Yes, he is. Unfortunately, Thorir of Gard, who's still angry about that whole Grettir killing his sons thing. I think he can get over that. Thorir throws his weight around at the all thing and gets the case rejected on a technicality.
Oh.
But Stein promises to consider the matter again, and so now the pressure's really on Thorir and Thorbjorn Hook if they want Grettir to pay for what they perceive as his crimes.
There's a kind of time limit being imposed now.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So Thorbjorn is going to look for new ways to deal with the Grettir problem. So he turns to his old foster mother, a woman named Thurid, who is, well, I guess she's like a witch out of a fairy tale.
Yeah.
She's still secretly practicing pagan sacrifice, which isn't actually illegal at this point in Iceland, even though the country's technically converted to Christianity.
Yeah, for a while after the conversion, it's only a punishable crime to practice paganism openly. what you do on your own turf or in your own turf house is your own business.
So clever. It's very true, but it's pretty clear that the author is against this. He calls what she does black magic and secret arts and trickery. It's very specific word choices here.
Right. Well, I mean, we're clearly not meant to admire her commitment to keeping up the venerable traditions and folkways of her society.
Wouldn't you? I mean, if you have an evil witch foster mother, wouldn't you go to her first for help? I mean, why mess about with this Norwegian cliff climber?
No idea. Maybe they felt like they didn't have enough of a Norwegian body count in this episode. But I also suspect that Thorbjorn Hook might not be the sharpest knife in the drawer. At least he knows enough to follow Thurid's advice. So he rows out to Drangi a third time, but this time Thurid's hidden on the boat. Ooh. And while Grettir shouts insults down at Hook, Thurid shouts back a curse at Grettir. I curse you, Grettir, to be deprived of all favor, all endowments and fortune, all defense and wisdom.
Now, well, first of all, he's already deprived of all of that, but...
Well, yes.
It does upset Grettir quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Now, we've said before that he's kind of halfway between Christian and pagan, and he definitely believes in the power of witches. But he also believes in the power of large rocks thrown by strong men. So he pitches a rock at Hook's boat that hits Thurid in the leg, and it breaks her thigh bone.
Yeah,
good aim.
Illugi chastises his big brother for throwing the rock, but Grettir's just sorry he didn't kill her.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Hook is shocked that anyone could throw a stone that far, and he and Thurid hastily return to the mainland, where Thurid spends a month in bed while her leg heals.
And by the time she's healed, the rumors have gotten around the region that Grettir's made a fool of Hook once again, and everyone's really letting Hook have it. He looks like a complete idiot. And so the former shareholders of Drangi start asking Hook either to give them back their claims on the island, or maybe to do something useful about Grettir for once.
Yeah, now, Hook's a terrible person, and we're obviously meant to hate this guy, but it's kind of hard at this point not to feel at least a little pity for the man. Mm-hmm. He's being abused on all sides, he's got an impossible problem on his hands, and everyone in the district seems to be enjoying his discomfort. And I'm sure Thurid's not the easiest bedridden house guest in the world either.
Well, at least she's got a plan for dealing with Grettir. Once she's able to walk again, she casts a curse on an old tree stump.
That is cunning. Presumably that stump will learn a harsh lesson about crossing her.
No. She has the stump then thrown into the sea, and further spells will ensure that this stump is going to float out to Drangi.
Oh, okay. So this actually does make sense. I mean, if you accept that you can curse a tree stump. We've mentioned before that a lot of Icelanders were largely dependent on driftwood for building materials and firewood. And after almost 3 years on the island, Grettir's running out of resources. So a big hunk of potential firewood is sure to be a tempting bit of flotsam.
And it ought to be, but Grettir's got a talent for spotting traps like this, and he senses the curse on the stump, and so he throws it back out to sea. But the next day it floats back, this time right near their ladder, and since their servant Glaum's in charge of collecting firewood that day, he does grab the stump and brings it back.
This is a fairly convoluted plan. But I do like the detail of the stump sort of sneaking back onto shore after Grettir rejects it.
Yeah, but Grettir's annoyed with Glaum whining about his work, so he swings an axe at the stump without inspecting it first, and the axe bounces off the stump, hits Grettir in the right leg, and makes a very deep wound.
Now that's unpleasant, but Grettir's been wounded before, and badly. Illugi dresses the wound, and for 3 days it seems to be healing well, as usual. But on the 4th night, Grettir has a bad dream, and when he wakes up, the wound has turned black and swollen and painful.
And Grettir now knows that this is Thurid's curse at work, and he composes a kind of death song verse in which he relates a number of his fights that aren't actually covered in this saga.
My God, there's more?
Oh, yes.
I understand why the author didn't include them in detail. I mean, this thing's got to end sometime.
And Grettir concludes his poem with the verse that began this section, which concludes, "Now that tough hag, land of stones, has wrought a spell on the tree that sheds flaming battle swords. Fierce is the force of magic."
Now, Grettir might be composing his own eulogy, but he's not planning on giving up without a fight. He orders Glaum to stand guard at the ladders, while Illugi plays nursemaid to Grettir. But for 2 weeks, the wound continues to get worse, and Glaum, meanwhile, complains incessantly about having to stand guard in the cold weather.
Now, the narrative action shifts back and forth from the island to the mainland repeatedly. It's really nicely constructed to maximize the tension. Mm-hmm. While Grettir struggles to overcome Thorir's curse, she then pushes Hook to hurry and make use of the advantage that she's given him. But he's having trouble gathering men because Grettir's assessment was right. Most people in the area hate both Grettir and Hook equally, and they're not willing to lift a finger to help him.
It's not entirely surprising, but it does mean that there's a real race going on here. Grettir's injury might not be fatal, and Hook can't risk having him recover and come for revenge. Hook's eventually able to cobble together a band of 18 men and borrow a larger boat, but even then, the men helping him aren't happy about it, and more than one of them grumbles about the use of sorcery.
Understandably so. I mean, this is the 11th century after all, and Christian men aren't supposed to be involved in that sort of thing.
Right. So this band of unhappy warriors sails out to the island, and there's more mystical help at this point involving Thorir controlling the tides, by the way.
So morale's not going to be very high with this mostly Christian group.
No. But when they get to the island, they discover something strange. The ladder that allows access to the top of the cliffs hasn't been pulled up. They don't know why, but they're not about to question their good fortune. And when they scramble up the ladder, they find Glaum, the guard, fast asleep.
Oh, Glaum. Now, that's kind of interesting. I mean, I think we've talked about this before, but people in the sagas often get sleepy in the presence of magic or at moments of fate. But I'm not sure that that's what's happening here. I think that this is just part of Glaum being lazy.
Right. It does seem that way. I mean, the author's been setting up his growing discontentedness and his unreliability for a while. Remember, he's the one who let the fire go out a while back.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's going to pay for it now. Mm-hmm. Thorbjorn, Hook, and his men beat Glaum into a bloody mess, and then they leave him lying there. It's totally gratuitous and overblown, but it's clear that they're outraged on Grettir's behalf by Glaum's poor conduct, which is kind of a strange view for them to take.
Well, I mean, this is one of those moments, I think, when social class provides its own kind of dividing line. Right? They may be there to kill Grettir, but they hate the idea of him being saddled with a lazy servant.
Okay. Well, speaking of the killing, let's get to that. Mm-hmm. Grettir and Illugi are alone in their hut, but when Hook's men try to rush the door, Illugi is able to hold them off by chopping at any weapon or any body part that comes through the doorway. It's a classic defensive tactic, and on this island, the attackers don't have any materials they'd need to burn the house down, which is the pretty usual way of getting around the problem. Mm-hmm. So instead, they begin tearing off the roof of the hut.
Now, of course, that's not going to be easy, because by now, Grettir's got a spear in his hand, and he's stabbing away randomly at the thatch. He manages to kill one man, but the roof is eventually torn away, and the attackers just pour into the hut.
Illugi and Grettir are fighting very hard, but they're outnumbered 17-2, and Grettir's barely able to stand. He manages to chop another man in half with his short sword, but then Hook stabs him in the back with a spear, and Grettir's down.
And Grettir calls out,
"There's the back of a brotherless man,"
which is either a rebuke to Illugi or a call for his help. Illugi throws a shield over Grettir's back and stands guard over him. Everyone's impressed. Remember, Illugi's only a teenager. But they cover him with their shields and drag him down to the ground.
The attackers all think that Grettir's dead by now because he's bled white from all his wounds, but when Hook tries to take the famous short sword away, it's still so tight in Grettir's grasp that they have to chop off his hand to get the sword away from him. Hook then uses Grettir's own sword to hack away at Grettir's head, striking so roughly that he badly notches the sword blade before Grettir's head is finally severed from his body.
And that's it. That's the end of Grettir Asmundarson. Mm-hmm. Not a glorious battle. In the end, like we saw with Gisli Sursun, who got his glorious battle, Grettir does not. I think that's actually part of the point the author's making. Grettir's life and death come after the glory days of Icelandic heroes. His tragedy is to be a great man in a time that has no patience for great men. And it's a small man who ultimately brings him down.
Yeah, I suppose there's something to that. I mean, Robert Cook says that although there can be no doubt that there was a real Grettir Asmundarson who was born around the year 1000, Grettir seems more a figure from mythology than a realistic Icelander of the 11th century.
Well, One of the common opinions about this saga is that it's overwhelmingly a pessimistic, fatalistic text. And sometimes that's at odds with the larger-than-life aspects of Grettir's personality. Einarsson, who we talked about earlier, makes a good point about this. He compares Grettir to Njal Thordarson of Njal's saga, but says that while both men are bedeviled by fate, the difference between them is that Njal fights fate, but Grettir drifts.
Not exactly a glowing eulogy. Didn't you like Grettir before?
I do, and I'm not saying that I agree with Einarsson, but I do think there's a tragedy to Grettir's death that's partly about the anticlimactic nature of the way he goes. C.S. Lewis once wrote that a danger of democracies is that they don't necessarily want great men. And that's especially true of the kind of great men who ignore social conventions and are generally unpleasant to be around. In the end, Grettir's a larger-than-life man torn down by weak people whose motivations are small and dirty.
Now, I'm still more inclined to read Grettir as an ambiguous figure. Now, I don't know that we're supposed to be in his corner necessarily, though I think there is a comment on society and justice here. I think it's significant that the author goes out of his way to point out that Grettir and Hook are both villains by their contemporary standards. But this is getting into things that we'll undoubtedly be covering in the judgment sections.
Fair enough.
For now, we need to wrap this thing up, okay? Hook is going to try to get Illugi to agree to swear not to seek revenge, but Illugi instead swears that if he's allowed to live, he'll kill Hook the first chance he gets. So Hook has him beheaded, and the two brothers are buried together on the island. But Hook keeps Grettir's head and his sword.
Now, the men with Hook are really impressed with Illugi, and they aren't at all happy with Hook, so it's not a happy party that heads back to the mainland. And they take Glaum with them, but he complains so much that they kill him to shut him up as soon as they reach land.
Not exactly a great loss to the community.
No. Hook rides with a band of 20 men to the farm of Asdis, Grettir and Illugi's mother, to bring the news of their death and to show her Grettir's head. He's that kind of a jerk. He enters the farmhouse and offers mocking praise of Grettir in a verse, to which Asdis replies with a verse of her own. No less than sheep fleeing a wolf, you would have jumped into the sea, you man of golden sow's droppings, laughing stock of the north, had the battle tree stood upright on the island, had Grettir the war-bringer been sound, I make light of your praise.
Now, she was already regarded as an impressive woman, but that's pretty badass.
It is.
I mean, meanwhile, her grandson Ospak learns from the men who rode with Hook about Illugi's brave defense of his brother and Grettir's firm grip on his sword even in death. And as the stories of what happened on Drangi get around, public opinion starts to turn against Hook.
You know, just as an aside, Ospak's one of those strange cases. We mentioned before that this is the same guy who's the villain in Bandamana Saga. There he comes across as a conniving and violent crook, but in this saga, he's a dutiful member of a powerful family.
Exactly. And that family is getting stronger. Some marriages and alliances are going on behind the scenes that help build support for Grettir's family. And Hook is about to be in some pretty big trouble for this killing.
Yeah, but this is where we start to see just how tone-deaf Hook is. He insists on taking Grettir's head to the All Thing in the summer. He's had it stored in salt to keep it fresh. And his allies, even his allies, are saying, don't bring the head. You're in enough trouble already. And finally, halfway to the All Thing, Hook gives in and buries the head in a random hill for safekeeping. But he still goes to the All Thing and argues that he should receive the reward Thorir of Gard promised for Grettir's head.
And we see the political acumen of Grettir's family at this point. They spread the stories of what Hook did on the island, and with their allies, they're able to turn the occasion into a referendum on Hook's conduct.
Right, and that's not going to go well for Hook, because even his friends don't like what he did.
Exactly. Instead of getting the reward, Hook gets outlawed for using sorcery and for unnecessarily hacking at Grettir's body. And because of Hook's case, it is also made law that anyone who uses black magic from this point forward will also be outlawed.
So, by the time the All Thing is over, Thorbjorn Hook realizes that he needs to flee Iceland at once to avoid being hunted down by Grettir's family, and he starts planning his escape. Meanwhile, the family has Grettir and Illugi's bodies moved to the mainland and buried in a churchyard.
And so that is where we're going to leave things. But unbelievably, that is not the end of our story.
Right.
There are 9 more chapters of epilogue to wrap this story up.
Yeah, this final section is often dealt with separately by critics, so much so that it's got its own name. It's called the Spesarthottir. So we'll return one last time for a shorter episode dealing with the coda to Grettir's saga.
But for now, we'd like to thank you for listening and for getting involved online. There's been a great conversation going on Facebook, for example, about the nature of Grettir's short sword, and it's been so much fun, in fact, that I've decided to write a paper on the subject. A special thanks to Adam Parsons and Tiffany Townsend for their contributions to that. I don't think I'd be thinking about this paper seriously without their help.
And you too can join us on Facebook or Twitter to let us know what you think about this episode, or about Grettir or the sagas in general.
Yes, in fact, we just got a comment from Andrew O'Brien about our Vatnsdal episode.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Okay, so he said that he just binged through all the Vatnsdal episodes and he really enjoyed them, but he wanted to lodge a complaint, and this is what he says.
Oh?
He says that we're totally wrong about the nicknames.
Okay.
Not only did Thorolf Sledgehammer never actually use a sledgehammer, but evil killer cats are like the furthest thing from a sledgehammer. It would be like if there was a gangster named Machine Gun Nicky, and if you ask the other gangsters, they'd be like, him? Oh man, stay away from Machine Gun Nicky. He likes to poison people.
It's rather a brilliant analogy, really.
It is. It's pretty good. So he preferred Thordis Pride of the Farm as the nickname there, which I think is a reasonable complaint.
It's a good name.
Yeah.
Well, you can also get in touch with us to let us know what we got wrong through email at sagathingpodcast@gmail.com. Or on Twitter or on Facebook, or by putting a note in a bottle, tossing it in the ocean, and waiting a few decades.
And if you're so inclined, we're always grateful to those of you who have reviewed us on iTunes. Every review helps us to get a wider audience. Thank you so much for that, and we will be back soon with the epilogue to Grettir's saga.
Bye for now. It's your cue! The moment's arrived!
It's all about timing.